The morning air in London was crisp and fresh as thousands of people gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Today was going to be special. The famous changing of the guard ceremony was about to begin, and tourists from every corner of the world had come to see it. Among the excited crowd stood the Rodriguez family from Texas. They had saved money for 2 years to make this dream trip happen. Miguel Rodriguez held his camera ready, while his wife Sofia checked their guidebook one more time. Their 7-year-old daughter Luna bounced on her toes, clutching a small stuffed teddy bear she had brought from home. Luna had been talking about this moment for weeks. She had watched videos of the royal guards online, amazed by their tall black hats and bright red coats. To her, they looked like characters from a fairy tale book. Her big brown eyes sparkled with wonder as she looked around at all the people speaking different languages. The palace gates gleamed in the sunlight. Security guards stood at various points, keeping everyone safe. Street vendors sold souvenirs and snacks nearby. The smell of fresh coffee and pastries filled the air from small cafes across the street. Everything felt magical to Luna. As more people arrived, the crowd grew thicker. Everyone wanted the best spot to take photos. Miguel lifted Luna onto his shoulder so she could see better over the adults in front of them. From up there, she felt like a princess looking down at her kingdom. The royal guards began to appear, marching in perfect formation. Their boots clicked against the pavement in rhythm. Each step was exactly the same as the one before it. Their faces showed no emotion at all. They looked straight ahead, never blinking, never smiling, never looking at the crowd. Luna was fascinated. How could they stay so still? How did they not get tired? She whispered questions to her parents, but they were too busy taking photos to answer properly. The crowd pressed closer, everyone trying to get the perfect shot for their social media accounts. Senior guard David Thompson stood at his assigned post near the main gate. He had been doing this job for 5 years now. At 26 years old, he was one of the younger guards, but he took his duty very seriously. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his boots shined to perfection, and his tall bearskin hat sat exactly as it should. David had trained for months to reach this level of discipline. Standing completely still for hours was harder than most people realized. His back ached, his feet hurt, and sweat dripped down his face under the heavy hat, but he never moved. That was the rule. That was what made the Queen's Guard special. The crowd grew louder and more excited. Cameras flashed constantly. Children laughed and pointed. Adults pushed forward, trying to get closer. David had seen it all before. He learned to tune out the noise and focus on his duty. But then something changed. The crowd surged forward suddenly as someone shouted that the main ceremony was starting. People moved like a wave, all pushing in the same direction. In the chaos, Miguel lost his grip on Luna for just a second as someone bumped into him. Luna slipped down from her father's shoulders and found herself on the ground, surrounded by legs and feet. The adults around her were much taller, and she couldn't see her parents anywhere. Panic started to rise in her chest. "Mama," she called out. But her small voice was lost in the noise of hundreds of excited tourists. She tried to push through the crowd, but people were too focused on the ceremony to notice one small girl. The stuffed teddy bear fell from her hands and was quickly stepped on by someone rushing past. Luna's eyes filled with tears as she watched her favorite toy disappear under the moving crowd. Everything was happening too fast. The happy, magical feeling was gone, replaced by pure fear. Sofia and Miguel realized what had happened within seconds, but the crowd had already carried Luna away from them. They began pushing through the people, calling her name frantically. But with so many tourists speaking different languages and making noise, their voices couldn't reach their daughter. Luna tried to be brave like her mama always told her to be, but she was only 7 years old. The big palace suddenly felt scary instead of magical. The guards who had seemed like fairy tale characters now looked intimidating and far away. She was completely alone in a foreign country, surrounded by strangers. She looked up at all the tall adults around her, hoping someone would help. Some people glanced down and smiled, but they were too busy with their own families and photo opportunities to stop. Others didn't even notice her at all. Luna felt invisible and lost. The ceremony continued around her. The guards marched in their perfect formation. Tourists cheered and took pictures. But for Luna, the whole world had become confusing and frightening. She just wanted her mama and papa to find her. David maintained his position, but his trained eyes noticed something different in the crowd. His job was to watch for anything unusual or dangerous. What he saw was a small figure in a bright pink dress turning in circles, clearly distressed. From his angle, he could see that the little girl was crying. She was looking around desperately, obviously separated from her family. David's heart began to beat faster. This wasn't part of his normal duty, but his instincts as a protector kicked in. The rules were clear. Guards must never break their stance. They couldn't speak to tourists or react to anything happening around them. Their job was to remain perfectly still and maintain the dignity of their position. Any guard who broke these rules faced serious consequences. But as David watched Luna become more frightened and lost in the growing crowd, he felt something stronger than rules pulling at him. This wasn't about ceremony or tradition anymore. This was about a child who needed help, and he might be the only one who could provide it. The internal battle began in David's mind. His training said one thing, but his heart said something completely different. As Luna stumbled and nearly fell, overwhelmed by the chaos around her, David knew he had to make a choice that would change everything. Luna's quiet sniffles grew louder as the crowd continued to move around her like a river flowing around a small rock. The ceremony was reaching its peak, and everyone wanted to capture the perfect moment. Phones and cameras were held high in the air, blocking her view even more. She tried to squeeze between people, hoping to find a familiar face. Her small hands tugged at jacket sleeves and coat hems, trying to get someone's attention. But most people were too focused on the spectacle in front of them to notice one frightened child. "Excuse me," Luna whispered to a tall man with a big camera. He looked down for a moment, smiled kindly, but then turned back to taking photos. Luna didn't speak the same language as many of the tourists around her, which made everything even more confusing. A group of teenagers pushed past her, laughing and trying to get a better view. Luna stumbled backward and almost fell again. Her pink dress was getting wrinkled and her hair was messy from trying to move through the crowd. The tears on her cheeks made everything look blurry. David watched all of this happening from his post. Every part of his training told him to stay still and focus on his duty. The Queen's Guard had a reputation that went back hundreds of years. They were famous around the world for their discipline and their ability to remain unmoved no matter what happened around them. He remembered his first day of training. The sergeant had been very clear about the rules. "You are not just a soldier," he had said. "You are a symbol of British tradition and excellence. People come from everywhere to see you. They expect perfection, and that's what you will give them." David had seen other guards tested before. Tourists would try to make them laugh or react. Children would wave and try to get their attention. Sometimes people would even try to touch them or take selfies right next to their faces. Through it all, a proper guard never moved, never spoke, never even blinked more than necessary. Breaking protocol wasn't just against the rules. It could end a career. David had worked too hard to get this position to throw it away. His family was proud of him. His girlfriend bragged to her friends about dating a Queen's Guard. This job meant everything to him. But as he watched Luna, his resolve began to crack. She was so small, so obviously scared. Her parents were nowhere to be seen, and the crowd was getting thicker by the minute. What if she got hurt? What if someone accidentally stepped on her? What if she wandered away and got completely lost in the busy streets of London? David's mind raced through the possibilities. The ceremony would end soon, and when it did, the crowd would disperse in all directions. If Luna didn't find her parents before then, she could end up anywhere in the city. A 7-year-old girl alone in London was a terrifying thought. He tried to spot her parents in the crowd. There had to be someone looking for her. He scanned faces, looking for signs of panic or distress that would indicate worried parents. But with hundreds of people all moving and talking and taking photos, it was impossible to identify anyone specific. Luna made another attempt to get help. She approached a woman with kind eyes who was standing with her own family. "Please," Luna said in her small voice, "I can't find my mama and papa." The woman looked down with sympathy, but she was managing 3 children of her own and didn't speak English very well. She said something in another language and pointed in a random direction, trying to be helpful but not really understanding what Luna needed. This made Luna feel even more lost. She thanked the woman politely like her parents had taught her, but inside she felt more hopeless than before. The noise of the crowd seemed to get louder. The palace seemed bigger and more intimidating. Everything felt overwhelming. David's hands were starting to shake slightly, though no one could see it because of his rigid posture. His conscience was at war with his training. He had sworn an oath to uphold the traditions of his regiment, but he had also sworn to protect people, and wasn't that what this little girl needed right now? He thought about what his own parents would want him to do. They had raised him to be kind and helpful, to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. They would be horrified to know he had watched a child in distress and done nothing to help. The other guards around him remained perfectly still, but David could sense that some of them had noticed the situation too. It was impossible to miss Luna's bright pink dress and obvious distress. But they all had the same training, the same rules, the same fears about breaking protocol. Minutes felt like hours as David wrestled with his decision. Every second that passed was another second that Luna remained lost and scared. The crowd wasn't getting any smaller and her parents still hadn't appeared. Luna tried one more time to push through the crowd toward where she thought she had last seen her parents. But she was too short to see over the adults, and every direction looked the same. She was going in circles, getting more confused and frightened with each step. That's when it happened. Luna stumbled over someone's bag that had been set on the ground. She fell forward, scraping her knee on the pavement. The small injury wasn't serious, but it was the final straw for her emotional state. She sat on the ground and began to cry openly. Not the quiet sniffles from before, but real sobs of fear and pain. Several tourists noticed her fall and looked concerned, but no one stopped to help. They assumed she belonged to someone nearby and that her parents would come to get her, but her parents were still lost in the crowd, desperately searching but unable to see their daughter sitting on the ground. David watched Luna fall and saw her start to cry in earnest. Something deep inside him snapped. All the rules and regulations that had been drilled into his head suddenly seemed less important than the basic human need to help someone in trouble. His commanding officer's words echoed in his memory. "We serve the crown and the people of Britain." Well, Luna might not be British, but she was a person, and she was in his country, under his protection. Wasn't helping her exactly what his oath meant? David made his choice. For the first time in hours, he began to move. The first movement was small, almost unnoticeable. David shifted his weight slightly, turning his head just a few degrees toward where Luna sat crying on the ground. To most tourists, it would have looked like nothing. But to anyone who knew the Queen's Guard, it was like watching a statue come to life. David's heart pounded as he took his first step away from his post. Each movement felt monumental. His heavy boots, which had been planted firmly in place for over 2 hours, now carried him slowly toward the distressed child. The tall bearskin hat that had remained perfectly straight now tilted slightly as he looked down. Luna was still sitting on the pavement, holding her scraped knee and crying. Her pink dress was dirty now and her hair had fallen in front of her face. She looked so small and vulnerable, surrounded by hundreds of adult legs moving past her. "Hey there, little one," David said softly, his voice gentle and warm. It was the first time he had spoken during his entire shift, and the words felt strange coming out after hours of silence. Luna looked up, surprised to hear someone talking directly to her. Through her tears, she saw the tall guard kneeling down to her level. His red uniform was bright and official-looking, but his eyes were kind. For the first time since getting lost, someone was actually paying attention to her. "Are you hurt?" David asked, noticing the small scrape on her knee. His voice had a slight British accent that Luna found comforting somehow. It reminded her of the movies she watched at home. Luna nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I fell down," she said in a small voice, "and I can't find my mama and papa anywhere." David felt his heart break a little. This child was so far from home, so scared and alone. He had made the right choice, regardless of what consequences might come later. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked. "Luna," she replied, finally managing to stop crying long enough to talk properly. "Luna Rodriguez. We're from Texas." "That's a beautiful name," David said with a genuine smile. "I'm David. I'm going to help you find your parents, okay?" As their conversation continued, something remarkable began to happen around them. The tourists closest to them started to notice what was occurring. Phones that had been pointed at the ceremony began turning toward David and Luna instead. At first, people weren't sure what they were seeing. Queen's Guard simply didn't do this. They didn't break formation, they didn't talk to tourists, and they certainly didn't kneel down to comfort children. But there it was, happening right in front of them. Word began to spread through the crowd like ripples in a pond. "Look, the guard is helping that little girl," someone whispered. "Is he allowed to do that?" another person asked. "I've never seen anything like this before," said a third. David was aware of the attention they were getting, but he pushed it out of his mind. Right now, his only concern was Luna. "Can you tell me what your parents look like?" he asked. "That way I can help you spot them in the crowd." Luna thought for a moment, trying to remember through her distress. "My papa has dark hair and he's wearing a blue shirt. Mama has long black hair and a yellow jacket. Papa was carrying a big camera." David stood up and scanned the crowd, his trained eyes searching for anyone matching that description. His height advantage as a guard gave him a better view than most people had. He could see over the heads of tourists looking for signs of frantic parents. "There are a lot of people here," David explained to Luna. "But don't worry, your parents are looking for you too, I'm sure. Let's see if we can spot them together." He helped Luna to her feet and kept one protective hand on her shoulder. The crowd around them continued to grow more interested in their interaction. Cameras and phones were now openly pointed in their direction. People were starting to realize they were witnessing something special. Luna felt safer with David beside her. He was tall and strong, and his uniform made him look important and trustworthy. "Are you really a Queen's Guard?" she asked, looking up at his impressive hat. "I am," David replied, "and part of my job is to keep people safe. That includes you." This wasn't technically true according to his official duties, but David felt it should be true. What good was all his training and authority if he couldn't use it to help someone who really needed it? One of the other guards, positioned about 20 feet away, caught David's eye. His fellow guard gave him a look that seemed to say, "What are you doing?" But David also thought he saw a tiny nod of approval.
Even the other guards could see that this situation was different. "David," Luna said, tugging on his red coat. "What if my parents can't find me?"
"What if they went home without me?" "That will never happen," David assured her firmly. "Parents don't leave without their children, especially not parents who brought you all the way from Texas to see London. They love you very much, and they're probably very worried right now. We just need to help them find you." The crowd was definitely taking notice now. What had started as a few curious onlookers had grown into a significant audience. People were pointing and whispering, and many were recording the interaction on their phones. David raised his voice slightly, though he maintained his gentle tone with Luna. "Excuse me, everyone," he called out. "This little girl is looking for her parents. They're tourists from Texas. The father has dark hair, blue shirt, and a camera. The mother has long black hair and a yellow jacket. If anyone has seen them, please help us." This was completely unprecedented. A Queen's Guard asking tourists for help, speaking loudly enough for multiple people to hear, abandoning his post to assist a child. By all traditional standards, David was committing multiple serious violations of protocol. But something magical began to happen. Instead of continuing to focus only on the ceremony, people in the crowd started actively looking around for Luna's parents. Tourists began talking to each other, sharing the description, spreading the word further. Through the gathered masses, "I think I saw someone matching that description. Over by the gates," called out a woman with a French accent. "There's a man with a camera asking the police for help. Near the gift shop," added another voice. The crowd was transforming from a collection of individual tourists into a community, working together to solve a problem. All because one guard had chosen to break the rules and show basic human kindness. Luna looked up at David with admiration. "You're really good at helping people," she said simply. David smiled down at her. "Thank you, Luna. You're being very brave too." As they stood there together, the guard in his perfect red uniform and the little girl in her wrinkled pink dress, cameras continued to capture their interaction. None of them knew it yet, but they were creating a moment that would touch hearts around the world. The search effort was growing by the minute. What had started with David's simple request for help had sparked something beautiful in the crowd. Tourists who had been strangers moments before were now working together, sharing information and actively looking for Luna's missing parents. A teenage girl approached them, speaking in rapid Spanish to Luna. Luna's face lit up as she was finally able to communicate in a language that felt comfortable. The teenager translated to David that she had seen a couple matching the description asking security guards for help near the main entrance. "They're looking for you too, Luna," David explained. Let's head in that direction. As they began to move through the crowd, David kept Luna close to his side. People stepped aside to let them pass, many of them smiling at the unusual sight of a Queen's Guard escorting a lost child. The traditional formality of the ceremony had been replaced by something much more human and warm. Cameras followed their every step. This wasn't just a few phones anymore. Professional photographers and news reporters who had been covering the ceremony were now focusing entirely on David and Luna. They could sense that this was a story worth telling. Sir, called out a voice from behind them. They turned to see a man in a blue shirt pushing through the crowd, a large camera hanging around his neck. Behind him was a woman in a bright yellow jacket, both of them looking frantic with worry. "Papa," Luna screamed, breaking away from David and running toward her father. "Mama!" The reunion was instant and emotional. Miguel scooped Luna up in his arms while Sophia wrapped both of them in a tight hug. All three of them were crying now, but these were tears of relief and joy instead of fear and worry. "Oh, my baby. We were so scared," Sophia said in English, then switched to Spanish to tell Luna how much they loved her and how worried they had been. David stood back, giving the family their moment. He felt a profound sense of satisfaction watching them reunite. This was why he had broken protocol. This moment right here made every possible consequence worth it. Miguel approached David with tears in his eyes. "Sir, thank you so much. We don't know how to repay you. You found our daughter when we couldn't." "No thanks necessary," David replied with dignity. "I'm just glad she's safe and back with you." Sophia joined her husband, still holding Luna tightly. "You broke your rules to help our daughter," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That's the kindest thing anyone has ever done for our family." David felt humbled by their gratitude. "Any parent would have done the same thing," he said. "She's a brave little girl." Luna wiggled in her mother's arms until she was able to look at David directly. "Thank you for helping me find my mama and papa," she said formally, like her parents had taught her to always say thank you properly. "You're very welcome, Luna," David replied with a warm smile. "I hope you enjoy the rest of your visit to London." As the family continued to thank him, David became aware of the crowd around them. What he saw surprised him. Instead of the usual mix of curious and distracted tourists, he was surrounded by people who were all looking directly at him and Luna's family. And they all had the same expression on their faces, genuine warmth and appreciation. Then something unexpected happened. One person in the crowd started to clap. It was slow at first, deliberate applause that cut through the background noise of the ceremony. Then another person joined in, and another. Within seconds, the applause spread like wildfire through the gathered tourists. Hundreds of people were clapping, not for the ceremony or the marching guards, but for the simple act of kindness they had just witnessed. The sound was thunderous and sustained, filled with genuine emotion. David felt overwhelmed. He had expected possible punishment for breaking protocol, not celebration. The crowd's reaction was completely unexpected. He had never experienced anything like this in his 5 years as a guard. The applause continued for what felt like minutes but was probably only 30 seconds. During that time, David understood that something important had happened here. This wasn't just about helping one lost child anymore. It was about reminding everyone present that compassion and humanity matter more than rules and traditions. Luna's family was crying again, moved by the crowd's response. Miguel shook David's hand firmly while Sophia gave him a gentle hug, which David accepted graciously despite his uniform. "We'll never forget this," Miguel said. "Never." As the applause finally died down, the crowd began to return to the ceremony, but the atmosphere had changed completely. People were talking to each other more, smiling more, looking around for ways to help others instead of just focusing on getting the perfect photo. David realized he needed to return to his post, though he wasn't sure what kind of reception awaited him there. He had broken several major protocols, and there would certainly be consequences to face later. "I should get back to my duties," he told Luna's family. "Wait," Luna said, reaching into her small purse. She pulled out a friendship bracelet made of colorful beads, the kind that children often make and trade with each other. "I made this for my best friend back home, but I want you to have it instead." David looked at the simple bracelet, touched by the gesture. Accepting gifts from tourists was against regulations, but after everything that had happened, one more broken rule didn't seem to matter. "Thank you, Luna, I'll treasure it," he said. carefully taking the bracelet and slipping it into his pocket. As David walked back toward his post, he could hear people in the crowd talking about what they had just witnessed. Phones were still recording, and he knew that videos of the interaction were probably already being uploaded to social media platforms around the world. Meanwhile, Luna's family began to leave the area, but not before taking one last photo of David returning to his position. They wanted to remember this moment forever, and they wanted to be able to show their friends back home the kind guard who had helped their daughter. The other guards welcomed David back with subtle nods of approval. They had all seen what happened, and while they couldn't openly support his decision to break protocol, they clearly respected why he had done it. As David resumed his formal stance, he felt different than he had that morning. He was still the same disciplined guard, still committed to his duties, but now he also knew that sometimes being human was more important than following every rule perfectly. The ceremony continued around him, but David's mind kept drifting back to Luna's grateful smile and the thunderous applause from hundreds of strangers who had witnessed one simple act of kindness. He had no idea that in a few hours that moment would be shared with millions of people around the world. Within 2 hours of the ceremony ending, the first video appeared on social media. A tourist from Germany had captured the entire interaction between David and Luna. From the moment he first knelt down to comfort her, through the reunion with her parents, to the spontaneous applause from the crowd, the video was titled "Queen's Guard Breaks Protocol to Help Lost Child," and it began spreading immediately. The person who posted it wrote, "I've never seen anything like this in my life. This guard chose kindness over rules and the whole crowd loved him for it." By evening, the video had been shared thousands of times across multiple platforms. People from different countries were commenting in dozens of languages, all expressing the same sentiment. This was what humanity looked like at its best. The comments section became a place where people shared their own stories of kindness from strangers. Parents talked about times when someone had helped their lost children. Travelers shared experiences of locals going out of their way to assist them in foreign countries. The video had sparked a global conversation about compassion. David had no idea about any of this. He had finished his shift, changed out of his uniform, and gone home to his small apartment in London. He was expecting a difficult conversation with his commanding officer the next morning, and he spent the evening wondering if he would still have a job by the end of the week. Meanwhile, Luna's family was at their hotel, still emotional about the day's events. Miguel had uploaded his own photos from the trip to his social media accounts, including several pictures of Luna with David. He wrote a lengthy post about the experience, describing how a stranger in a foreign country had shown more care for their daughter than some people they knew back home. Sophia called her sister in Texas to tell her about what had happened. "You should have seen him," she said. "He just threw all his rules away to help our baby, and then everyone clapped for him. It was like something from a movie." Luna was drawing pictures in her coloring book. One showed a tall figure in red helping a small figure in pink. She had already decided she wanted to write a thank you letter to David, though she wasn't sure how to send it to him. The video continued to gain momentum overnight. News outlets picked it up, and by the next morning, it was being featured on television programs around the world. The story had everything that people loved: a child in distress, an unlikely hero, a heartwarming reunion, and a crowd celebrating human decency. When David arrived at work the next morning, he was surprised to find that instead of being called into a disciplinary meeting, he was summoned to meet with senior palace officials. He walked into the meeting expecting the worst but hoping for understanding. "Guard Thompson," the senior officer began formally. David stood at attention, prepared for whatever consequences awaited him. "Yes, sir," David replied. "It has come to our attention that you broke protocol yesterday during the ceremony," the officer continued. "Multiple protocols, in fact. Yes, sir. I take full responsibility for my actions." The officer paused, studying David's face. "Can you explain why you chose to abandon your post and your duties?" David thought carefully about his answer. "Sir, I saw a child in distress who needed help. I felt that protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves was a higher duty than maintaining ceremonial protocol." There was silence in the room for several long moments. Then, unexpectedly, the senior officer smiled. "Guard Thompson, are you aware that your actions yesterday have been viewed by over 5 million people around the world?" David's eyes widened in surprise. No, sir. I had no idea. The video has brought more positive attention to the Queen's Guard than any ceremony in recent memory. You've reminded the world that we are not just ceremonial figures. We are protectors and servants of the people. David hardly dared to believe what he was hearing. Furthermore, the officer continued, we have received dozens of letters and emails from around the world, praising not just your actions but the character and compassion of the British military. You have honored our uniform, not disgraced it. Instead of punishment, David was officially commended for his service. The letter of commendation noted that while protocol must generally be followed, there are times when the highest form of duty is recognizing when human need supersedes regulation. The story continued to spread throughout the week. News programs interviewed child psychology experts who praised David's approach with Luna. Military historians discussed how the best soldiers have always been those who understand that rules serve people, not the other way around. Luna's family received hundreds of messages from people who had seen the video. Many were from other parents sharing their own stories, but some were from people who had been lost as children themselves and remembered how frightening the experience had been. 2 weeks later, Miguel and Sofia received an official letter from Buckingham Palace. Inside was a formal thank you note acknowledging their gracious response to the incident, along with a small gift for Luna, the official Queen's Guard teddy bear wearing a tiny red uniform and bearskin hat. Luna treasured the teddy bear, but she treasured the memory of David's kindness even more. She kept the photo of them together on her bedside table, and whenever she had a bad day, she would look at it and remember that there were good people in the world who would help others even when it was difficult. 6 months later, the video had been viewed over 20 million times. It had been translated into multiple languages and shared by celebrities, politicians, and ordinary people who were moved by its message. The moment had become a symbol of choosing compassion over convenience. David continued his service as a Queen's Guard, but his approach to the job had evolved. He still maintained the discipline and professionalism required by his position, but he also kept watch for anyone who might need help. His fellow guards began to do the same, inspired by his example. The incident became part of the training curriculum for new guards. Recruits were taught about the importance of judgment and discretion, and how true professionalism sometimes means knowing when to bend rules in service of a higher purpose. Luna grew up carrying the lessons she learned that day in London. As she got older, she made it a point to help others whenever she could, remembering how much it had meant to her when a stranger chose to care about her well-being. The friendship bracelet she had given David still sits in a place of honor in his apartment. It serves as a daily reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures of kindness can have the biggest impact on someone's life. Years later, when people asked David about that day, he would always say the same thing. I just did what anyone would do. But I learned that sometimes being human is more important than being perfect. The video remains online, continuing to touch new viewers every day. In the comments, people still share stories of kindness they've witnessed or experienced. David and Luna's brief encounter continues to inspire others to choose compassion, one small act at a time. And in a world that can sometimes feel cold and disconnected, their story serves as proof that goodness still exists, that strangers still care about each other, and that sometimes breaking the rules is exactly the right thing to do.